All right, hey everybody. So this morning, along with so much depends upon, which was to kind of sharpen our writing tools and get us thinking about concrete images, and that's really the baseline for everything we're trying to do. We did a couple exercises that those of you who've been with the writing project obviously have done before: point of view writing and episodic fiction or episodic nonfiction. Hopefully, those were intensive and you got a lot of material out of those. Again, none of that material necessarily or probably should be part of the finished product for what our goals are over the next couple of weeks, which is this book, because we'll be gathering interviews. None of the stuff we did this morning was interview gathering. It was nice to kind of go into your own space, because in some ways you're going to be telling your own story through the story you tell about others. But as far as other people, you're just looking at pictures with that one exercise. What it was practice, and this exercise too is going to be practice. And those of you who've been with us before kind of will maybe notice that we've sort of reversed these exercises. Usually the exercise we're getting ready to cover right now, and again, this is asynchronous, obviously, so you're going to have plenty of time to do it. And my little lesson is more of a refresher. Usually it comes first, and it's usually we use it as sort of an exercise to spark ideas and creativity, and it's a scene building exercise. It's called Scenes That Move. It's an exercise that I created geared towards my screenwriting classes, but then I saw that it would be helpful for narrative storytelling in general, even poetry that leans towards storytelling type poetry. And the idea is understanding all those key elements that have to be in a scene so that scene works. So if it's a scene in a movie, if it's a scene in a play, if it's a scene in a short story, if it's a scene in an essay, memoir, looking back piece, a narrative poem, these things need to be present in that scene for it to work. And so again, this is going to be familiar for some of you. For those of you who it's not familiar to, I am going to cover it thoroughly but concisely. But like I said, normally we use it as a sort of a jumping off point for creativity. Today, we're going to be using it as sort of a organizing principle for information you already have. And that'll make sense here in a second. And also, it'll make sense as you gather your interviews, and you'll sort of come to understand that, okay, I've got this big wealth of information from this person I interviewed. They weren't necessarily interested in giving it to me in any sort of form, and it's my job to put it into that form. So hopefully this will help that out. So real quick, if you want to go over these with me, I'm gonna draw on my sheet of paper something the size of a note card, because usually we do these on note cards, and the idea behind that is to keep it very concise. The 5 elements that I feel are most necessary when it comes to having a scene: first and foremost, we have setting. Before we can start, we need to know where this thing takes place. It needs to be grounded. It's not floating around in the headspace. It's not in the ether. It is someplace. It is in a classroom. It is in a gym. It's in a park. It's somewhere. It's also some time. So remember, setting is place and time. That can be time of day, and if necessary, it can be time of, it's particular. If you did gear up 2017 maybe, I believe that's when we got interrupted for a hurricane. So that experience was different than 2018 for a number of reasons. So time makes a difference too. Again, for this real brief run through, I'll go through one we've sort of done before, but we'll say we're at Applebee's restaurant. We'll say we're there at 5 p.m. because Applebee's at 5 p.m. is different than Applebee's at 5 a.m. And we'll say we're inside. So we'll say INT for interior. Okay, that's our setting. Our plot. Plot meaning not everything that happens. Think of plot as more of a setup. Toby needs to tell Josh that we have to skip an exercise, and it's Josh's favorite exercise, so he doesn't know how Josh is going to take it. That's probably even a little bit long. You want to keep these things to a sentence if best. So we're going to say, Mary invites Bill to dinner to break up with him. Cold-blooded, I know, but there we go. Please write along with these, and this will be your sort of template for what you're doing later on. Go ahead and write setting and plot. You won't do that, of course, when you make your own notes for your new scenes or whatever, but this is just so you know what we're talking about. So again, it's a set. It doesn't tell us everything that happens. And we may even not get to the end of what happens. Something else may come up, but that's our setup. As good writers that lap exercise to exercise, this morning we did a great run through of So Much Depends Upon. We need images, all right? So my goal here with images is always to maybe name 3 and try to make them 3 different sensory images. So maybe we have the smell of sizzling fajitas. I don't know if Applebee's serves fajitas, maybe they do. I assume they do. The sound of, I don't know, business. It's really busy there. And then if just one of these images could connect to one of the characters, that ties this thing in a little bit better. So let's say if Mary's nervous, maybe the sight of 2 empty beer bottles as she waits for Bill to join her. So she's there early, and I've had people do this one in the past. This is sort of a go-to for me. And they're like, maybe she's picking at it. I'm like, that's good. That's something you'd tell an actress if you're like in a scene, she's just picking at it. Movement is very important, as we'll see. Okay, the 4th one is the most important, and that's what we're going to call internal change. We call it conflict, but we're going to note it as we always do, internal change and then a plus and a minus. That doesn't mean good to bad, doesn't mean bad to good. It just means change. So it can be, starts off happy, ends up happier. But we're going to say Mary starts off nervous, ends up surprised. So what you want is a change in emotion with at least one of the characters. Nervous to surprised. That's a good one. Now we figure out how we get there when we write the scene. One more thing we need though is external change. And that means movement, physicality. One of the reasons, not a huge fan of interviews or interview papers, is a lot of times my students write the paper about the interview instead of about the person. And the interview itself, unless, you have there are some ways of going about it. Hunter S. Thompson did this sort of thing. There's other writers now probably insert themselves as well, like where they make the interview sort of active. The interview itself is boring. It's either going to be emails, it's going to be a phone call, but you're literally going to be sitting across from the person or sitting across from a computer or talking on the phone, not a lot of movement. Now, when you're telling the story about the person, there better be a lot of movement. In this case, what's the movement? What happens? And if you can tie that movement into the internal change, which is she's nervous and then she ends up surprised, even better. So let's say, here's how I noted it too, external change, and then instead of plus minus, I did greater than and less than. Again, that's just to note change. Let's say Mary tells Bill to have a seat. He walks in, she's sitting there nervous. She's like, sit down, she's nervous. Now she becomes surprised because instead of having a seat, he goes down to one knee, pulls out a ring, and proposes. Instead, Bill goes to a knee and proposes. All right, and now she's surprised. What happens? Does she say yes? Does she say no? Does she say what the hell? That's the next scene. This is everything we need in that scene. You can add things. There may be a server who shows up. There may be an annoying server. There may be a comforting server. There may be a couple drunks that hit on Mary. I don't know. Who knows what's there? Toby may be in the background, in the corner. We don't know. You can add that. All that can be added. But this is the core. This is what you need. And this, for our purposes, is an organizing principle of figuring out what you have and turning it into a scene for either a piece of creative nonfiction, narrative poem, something else for this project we're doing. Now, the part two that or using it later in the week, you'll kind of see how that comes about. But for our purposes today, what I'd like for you to do, you should have between 10 to 14 paragraphs, separate paragraphs from this morning. Know you have at least 8 point of view paragraphs where you're writing in the point of view of another person. You also should have probably at least 2, but probably possibly 4 episodic paragraphs from your own experience. So that's 4 plus 8, that's 12. Then added to one of those point of views are 3 more where you've created. So you've got some nonfiction, you've got some fiction, but it's all in paragraph form. What I'd like for you to do is I would like for you to pick your top 4 to 5 paragraphs and organize them, reorganize them. And this could mean adding some things, this could mean changing some things around, but do a note card for each of those and turn those into a complete scene. Because what you wrote was in the moment. You know, you had music playing in one case, you were just sort of throwing some things together. Didn't necessarily make for perfect scene construction environment. In this case, you get a chance to go back and say, let me organize this. Now, to make it more specific, I would really like it if you did now I'm not, basically why I didn't say this up front is because I don't want to bind you to that. But for me, the coolest thing you could do would be to either go, you could do both, but either go to your complete episodic nonfiction and turn each of those paragraphs into a scene. And then maybe to your point of view where you added some and do that as well. You could always go back to some of the, if you're struggling to find stuff, you can always go back to the original point of views you wrote and maybe didn't expand on. But if you did that with an episodic piece, like your own episodic piece, I mean, you're close to having something, you'd be close to having something really close to an outline to work with to turn this into something, you know, pretty cool. Hopefully everybody understands what I said, what I'm asking for. What I'm asking for you to do is, you know, for those overachievers, the best thing to do is something I would do is if I'm writing a script and I'm looking at a movie that is similar in comps with something I'm trying to work at, I do this exercise. I watch the movie with my kids, and as it's going on, I make note cards for each scene, and I just try to figure out, okay, what's going on. In your case, you may have to be adding some things because these aren't fully realized pieces. These are just paragraphs. That's cool too. The overachiever goes through every single paragraph you did, organizes it into 14 of these note cards, and that's it. That's the practice. Later on in the week, once you do the interview, I would stress that this is a wonderful idea. Once you get all the information down and you don't know what to do with it, if they've told you any type of story, turn it into a scene. Note card. If after you sort of piece some things together but don't really have a way of making it cohere, turn it into a couple scenes. Again, scenes that move, scenes that matter has always been a creative exercise. We usually pass note cards around and create our own scenes. It's fun. Here we're using it more as outline material, organizing material. And then from there you can build to a creative part of it. So this is the video portion of this afternoon's lesson. And right now I'd like for you to jump to it. Jump into those paragraphs. You've done the hard part. You've gotten the stuff written down. Now it's just organizing. Use this format to do it. And if you have any questions, I believe there's going to be somebody to take answers. I'll be around, but if you want to, you can also text or email me or chat with me directly on that screen. All right.